welcome to The Winning Mentality with me, Charlie Bosco. Now, as you'll hopefully have realised if you've been listening to this podcast for a while now, we don't pick guests based solely on the number of medals they have or the size of their public profile. Tony Smith has been a massively successful rugby league coach, but the reason we wanted to chat to him wasn't to ask about his big wins, it's because he's a thinker. He's a man with opinions and he's not afraid to express them. Since finishing an 11-year professional career, he's been in charge of Leeds, Huddersfield, England, Great Britain, and most recently he was head coach of Warrington Wolves for 9 years, which saw him win 3 Challenge Cups and reach 3 Super League Grand Finals. That final job at Warrington was notable not only for its success but also its length. Staying at one club for almost a decade is increasingly unusual in the modern cutthroat world of sport, and Tony has some fascinating thoughts on change within organisations and how to avoid complacency, stagnation, or cultures at odds with long-term success. Tony is happy to admit that he's struggled at times with the win-at-all-costs culture that pervades much of sport, and that the heart of what he loves in coaching is improving individuals rather than mindlessly trying to amass trophies by any means possible. Having left Warrington at the end of last season, he's now involved with helping managers in all sports and trying to support the people at the top of sporting organisations using his experience and insight into what they're going through. As you can probably tell already, this was a wide-ranging conversation with a fascinating and impressive guy. Enjoy. Tony, welcome. Thank you for coming on the podcast and having me into your lovely home here in the wilds of Yorkshire.
Thanks, Charlie. It's a real honour to be interviewed, and it's a beautiful little part of the world that we love, and it's challenging at times because of the weather and how exposed it is up here, but we do love it.
And you grew up in New South Wales, and for people that don't know Australia's sporting geography, how big is rugby league over there?
Yeah, it's a big sport. It is a big sport. The biggest rating television program of the year is a thing called the State of Origin. It's New South Wales versus Queensland in rugby league, the representative teams, and it's a 3-match series that's absolutely brutal. And it's already a brutal sport, rugby league, and very physical. But when it's played, it goes up about another 4 notches when it's Queensland versus New South Wales.
And what was it that attracted you to the game at first? Because you've had a very successful coaching career, but you started out as a player.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, no. Well, it was a little bit of age and time that I grew up in. It was a case of in New South Wales, boys played rugby league and winter predominantly, and there was football or soccer available, but in the area that I grew up and the family that I grew up in was rugby league. And in summer it was cricket, and they were the two things. So I was exposed to so many other sports at school and PE, and they really do in Australia through their education programs expose you to a lot of other sports, but they were the 2 big sports in growing up. And I had 2 elder brothers, but one of them went on to become a professional rugby league player and also a professional coach. So it was sort of in my family, and and whether it was in my DNA, but it was certainly in the upbringing that I had.
And when you look back on your playing career now, how do you reflect on it?
Oh, I'm happy to say I was a very ordinary player, very average player. I had 11 professional seasons as a rugby league player, but I'd say about 50% of the time I was in the reserve team or the second team. When I was at my best, I made the first team. So I was a player that wasn't overly gifted, but I had a pretty good understanding of what to do in my sport, but also I had the ability to probably help others around me. And I often reflect on my career as a player. I think I was coaching long before I finished playing. And I worked out that if I got the people around me to play well, that made me look a little bit better, and the team might have some more success. And when the team had more success, less changes. So I was trying to get the people around me to play well, and that dragged me along a little bit.
I remember Jurgen Klopp, the Liverpool manager, saying, I had 5th division talent and a 1st division mentality and ended up with the 2nd division career. It sounds like you're not dissimilar. Your mindset was great and your attitude was right.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, no, that's right. I was blessed to have whatever career I could in rugby league. It was my boyhood dream to become a professional rugby league player, and back in those days it wasn't full time. And it was, so you had to have other careers, and I did plenty of other things that helped me become a better coach. I was being exposed to a lot of different sort of values and leadership examples in my professional career that actually helped me with my sporting career. And there's some of the attributes that I think you can learn a lot of things along the way. But yeah, certainly I don't reflect too much on my own rugby league career, although it has helped me understand how much you have to work at things, and that things don't just come naturally to many of us, some more than others, but usually you have to work pretty hard to get to wherever you get.
Do you feel with hindsight you could have got further in your playing career? Are you suggesting that you didn't work hard enough, or did you just see what other people did to succeed?
Oh, no, I don't have any regrets about the way I went about what I did. There were certainly different stages of my career that I could have been more committed or work harder. I think everybody can look back and look at different parts of their lives and different distractions that come into your life at different stages and say, well, I probably could have applied myself a little better, but no regrets about all those things. It's their decisions that you make along the way. And what I'm saying is those experiences of those periods of time have helped me have a better understanding when I became a coach of some of the things that can distract people or some of the obstacles that can get in your way. And, I can still relate to those parts of my early life and understand how difficult choices they are to make. So they were all very useful experiences for me.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. It seems as if the most successful coaches weren't always the best players. Do you think that's perhaps because they have a different understanding of what players are going through? They have a little more empathy than the guy who was just fantastically talented from day one?
Possibly. But I don't go along with all that. I know there's plenty of examples of us not so good players becoming fairly decent coaches, but I think there's a lot of examples of very good players becoming very good coaches too. I think it's more to do with their personality and I don't disagree that having to work hard at your sport gives you a great understanding rather than it just coming easy and natural. So there's some advantages in being a struggler or not so talented, but I don't think it's a necessity. I think you could still, as long as you're a good communicator and have empathy. I think you've got to have empathy to be a good coach or a good manager.
Did you always want to get into coaching, or are you one of these people that you would have played until you were 100 if you could have done?
No, I couldn't wait to finish. Why
do you say that? The physical load?
Yeah, no, it just... I had no regrets about coming to the end of my career. I knew I was pretty average, and the older you get, the slower you get and the more battered around you get in my sport. So I was copping a beating on a more regular basis. So the opportunity to get into coaching couldn't come soon enough. As I mentioned earlier, I've had an elder brother who at that stage had been a head coach for a number of years. At one stage, I think he became the youngest coach in the NRL, or ARL it was back in those days in Australia.
The National Rugby League.
That's right. And back in the day where he first became a head coach, Brian, my eldest brother, he was, I think, 28 when he took over the Australian Rugby League team of Illawarra. Steelers some years ago, which then I went on to play under, and I played under him twice as a player. And
What was that like?
yeah, challenging. Yeah, certainly challenging, but we were both open to the idea that I probably had to perform a little better than the average to get my spot, because we had to show other people that there wasn't any preferential treatment. Just because we had the same last name and the same parents didn't guarantee me a spot in the team, and so it made me work that little bit harder. I played for him twice, once at Illawarra and also at St George Dragons, and then some years later had the privilege of working under him as an assistant coach when he was at the Parramatta Eels in Australia, and that was we had a really good working partnership, particularly when we became coaches. And I'd challenge him and he'd put me in my spot, and but I was prepared to speak up about things that maybe some other assistant coaches may not have proposed or pointed out, and we'd have good debate and arguments. And I was trained to challenge and be challenged, and it was a great insight and a great development for my future career.
What's that leap like from playing to coaching? Because I think in sport, it's often assumed that players, we hear it when they're talking about football, who go into coaching. It's not that simple. What's the leap like from playing to coaching?
Yeah, it can be difficult. It's not easy. I mean, I think most players will agree once they become a coach, it's a huge eye-opener to how much goes on behind the scenes. I think players, generally speaking, aren't aware of how much is done behind the scenes. And I had some insight into that because of my family connection. I was able to have some understanding before I took that leap from player to coach, because, I'd been involved in a family that had somebody who was committed to coaching for a long time, and so it exposed me to some understanding of what was to come. But still, it's still a big step, and then to make decisions about what's best for the team from a different perspective. When you were a player, you did it from a fairly selfish perspective at times, and then you start to become responsible for a whole lot of people once you go into coaching. So it changes the way you look at your sport and the way that you look at team makeup, and there's a lot more to consider. So yeah, it was a fascinating step, but for some it's difficult. But the hours often are remarkably different.
And what was the motivation to get into coaching for you? Is it just that you knew rugby league and it was a natural step, or did you have a burning desire to make players better and improve the game or improve an organisation?
Yeah, bit of both. At one stage, I had a really, not a really bad injury. I snapped my Achilles as a player at one stage, and I was out for 6 months. And I was a decent kicker of the ball in my sport, and I'd had some kick coaching by a great coach, a kicking coach, Dave Allred, who worked
with Johnny Wilkinson.
Absolutely, yeah, and he came out to Australia on a couple of occasions, and I had the privilege of working underneath him exposed to him for a couple of weeks at a time. And so I had some intense kick coaching, and I loved every moment of it and took a lot on board. Incredible coach and incredible abilities. But I had the privilege of learning loads from him. So when I was injured, rather than just be a player and sit on the injured bench, my brother was head coach at St George, and he asked me to work with the kickers. And that was getting towards the back end of my career, and it gave me a bit more exposure to coaching and the satisfaction out of passing on messages to players and seeing them developed. And I got a real buzz out of it. And I think that was probably the first real inkling that I'd like to get into coaching on a more full-time basis when I finished. So that exposure sort of unlocked something within me, and and it was a feeling of, wow, I can make a difference to somebody else, and rather than just care about my own performances. And so, yeah, it was a real burn in there, and then I've had it ever since, I think.
So it's the thing you really enjoy, the improvement of the individual. I mean, I haven't heard you speak much about, I want the organisation to progress. I mean, the team. Is the real heart of the pleasure for you when you see an individual improve because of your input?
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm not a win at all cost person. I try to win. I'm like everybody else in the world, pretty much. You know, you like winning, but it's the process more that I enjoy of how you get to that, or the chance to get to that. It's the improvement factor and striving to get better, but learning along the way from the things that get in your way and the obstacles. I find that fascinating. The journey to winning or being successful, and it isn't all about winning. It's, you know, I can give you many examples where people can be highly successful without being number one in the world, and or the best. If they're the best they can be, that's success. And I'm very much in that. And that was probably to do with my limited ability as a player. I had to try and to be the best I could be, because I knew I couldn't be the best rugby league player there was. I didn't have the attributes, but my challenge was to be the best I could be, and that's what I try to help people in my sport and in other ways too, in business now as well.
Well, that's an interesting point, because there's a debate, I suppose, most relevantly, I guess, right now in Manchester United, pragmatism versus enjoyable sport to watch. And it sounds like you're more on the side of sports about enjoyment. It's about entertainment rather than let's just get over the line.
Yeah, but I agree.
It's a difficult line, isn't it? Because there's a business as well, and
absolutely, it's a business, and if you don't win, and I see how that can affect businesses in sport, and it's very fickle, and it's a bizarre world, our sporting world. But but I can also understand the effects of us coaches and survival of by winning. With in many sports nowadays, it's almost the case of try not to lose rather than go out to win. And I think that challenges some of us within our makeup, but it challenges us in what we like to watch, and I've been challenged with that within my own sport. I think at times, it's a case of don't do anything wrong and you might win the game, rather than let's go for it and see how far it takes us. And because I was fairly conservative as a player, I think I've become a more as a coach, quite the opposite. I want my teams to be expansive and take risk, but also entertain. I think it's nice to coach a team or be involved in a club or team or an organisation where people say, wow, I like the way they go about their business.
I'm interested what's kept you engaged with rugby league for so long. What keeps the motivation going? Because this is by no means an insult, because most sports are, but it's a simple game, rugby league, isn't it? On the face of it. But it's kept you interested for so long. What is it? Can you put your finger on what it is about rugby league that gets you out of bed? Because we should also point out that when you're home now, it's an awful long way to Warrington, where you worked for many years. You've got to be motivated to get up at 6 a.m, get in the car every day.
Yeah, it's a lot to do with the people that you work with. It's, I'm in coaching because I like relationships. I like developing relationships. I like helping people become better if I can, and seeing change and developing people and myself along the way. The challenges of getting up and travelling, and they're just little things that you got to do, or the choices that you make and along the way. But yeah, I loved my sport for many years. There's some aspects of it that I probably challenge at the moment about some of the way it's been played, etc., etc. But overall, I've loved my sport and many other sports throughout the years, and it's the sense of belonging and sense of creating something and creating something special and being part of it. But it's the camaraderie that it brings. I love team sports in particular. I'm fascinated by some individual sports and and by the individuals themselves and how they've got to motivate themselves or inspire themselves to get out of bed and go and train as hard as they do. But the real fascination for me is the complexity of working with teams and so many different personalities. And as a coach, that's very challenging, because you've got to connect with so many different people yourself, but getting them to connect with one another is another complex part of coaching. It's not only about my connection with the players that I've had over the years, but getting them to connect with one another and getting them to connect with the other coaches and that you provide for them, and getting your staff to work and connect with each other. I just find that all very complex, and so to have success within any team sport or any sport really, but any team sport or business, it is so complex. We talk about sports being simple or looking like they're simple. To be successful is very, very complex. You need a lot of things to line up just right or close to just right. But there's so many things that can go wrong, and also you need a lot of things to go right to be successful. So it's the whole combination of it. It's which fascinates me. Rugby league, I do love it, but it was probably my vehicle to enjoy the development of people, but development of myself as well.
I mean, it's almost as if it could have been any sport. It was the story behind it rather than the technicalities of what was on the pitch.
Kind of, yeah. I think because where I was born into rugby league and cricket. Had I been born in another state, for those who don't understand Australia so much, or those who do, if I was born in Victoria or South Australia or West Australia, for instance, in that age group that I grew up in, the chances were I probably would have played Aussie rules. And I think I could have been a better player as an Aussie rules player. I was better at kicking the ball than passing it. No, there's no guarantee I would have been any good at it. But just to give you an idea of, the cultural influences that we have and how that shapes us. And so for me to grow up in where I was, well, that got me into rugby league. But I'd like to think that I would have been a decent Aussie rules player and maybe even a decent Aussie rules coach.
Funny the paths life takes you down. But I just want to go back to what we were talking about earlier on, was change. And I've seen you in other interviews talk about the need for organisations to have change. Why do organisations need change? Because you've been explaining how you get relationships to work, you build all these relationships and it leads to success, but at the same time, organisations need change.
Yeah, for various reasons, freshening things up. Sometimes you need new ideas, new voices, and new challenges. And by having change in the things that you do, keeps things fresh, and you don't get into that stagnated period of time that most businesses and sporting clubs go through. My last club was Warrington Wolves in Super League, and I stayed there for 9 years, and that was the longest by a long shot. And by the end of it, I think it was, it certainly was the right time for me to have a change, but them to have a change from me as well, and get some new ideas and new voices in there and new direction. But most organisations need that in some shape or form. Doesn't always mean necessarily with a head coach. I know, Arsenal are going through one now after 22 years, and I think he's done a remarkable job for him for 22 years, Arsene. And but at some stage, and that's when every organisation needs to understand when it's time for a change, but what sort of change too. I think those managers who coach or manage at the same place for a number of years, you'd probably see a change in some of the personnel, either his staff or playing staff, in the turnover at certain stages that freshen things up. So it doesn't always have to be, the manager or a coach or the CEO to move. It can be freshen things up in other parts of the organisation, I think is important. But, for me personally, I like change. I like the challenges of change, and I think it inspires me to, keep getting out of bed, and some of the things that come up with change are obstacles, but they're the things I like to to challenge myself with and overcome, and I think when you start somewhere new or you start something new, there's a fear factor involved as well, and I think that's important too, to keep you on your toes, and sometimes that makes things work and makes you work to make it work.
Why do you think stagnation happens, and is it inevitable? Is it related to complacency?
There's some elements of that. Hey, listen, I think that's all part of human nature. We get comfortable at times in certain things that we do and certain aspects, and I challenge any human being not to have suffered with complacency at certain parts of their either life or periods of time in their careers. But it's overcoming that, and that's what the great ones do. It's overcoming those. I've heard you talk to Damien Hughes in, I think, your first podcast in this series, and talk about some of the greats within the sport and how they're rich enough. They've had plenty of success, but they still get up and work hard, and they're the great champions. They are the great champions, because there is no doubt in the world, and I'd say each one of those that you mentioned in those interviews, Brady and I think it was also a couple of the tennis players that you mentioned, extreme success. But I'd still say that they've had their periods of complacency, but they overcome it, and that's what champions. That's probably the difference with a lot of us, that I think at different stages of our successes, whether we relax for a little bit or take things for granted or trust others around you, that you would have normally done things that yourself, or not trust people around you at times enough, and delegate enough when you've had success. I think that's also important to understand as well. But they're all things that will have been part of somebody's career, but then they learn by it and move on from it.
Well, we're getting to the heart of something fascinating here about how teams seem to almost always be winners or almost always be runners-up. I mean, I'm thinking about when you were at Leeds, you had a fantastically successful period in the early 2000s, and then in Warrington, it was 3 grand finals in 5 years?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, I don't remember the exact statistics, but 3 grand finals in a short space of time. Can you put your finger, now that you've been away from the game for a wee while, can you put your finger on why that Leeds team always found a way to get over the line? And with Warrington, it seemed like it was always just out of reach. Do you think it was just pure luck each time, or was there something deeper there?
I don't think it's luck. But I understand what you're saying. There's a grand final that you play each year, a series of finals leading up to the big one in rugby league, and you're right. I've had a couple of teams that have managed to get across the line on those occasions, and I've had a couple of teams that haven't on certain occasions. It's down to how you are on that day in that particular time. I've also had a couple of the Warrington team that you spoke of, and 3 successes at Wembley and in big games too. So it wasn't necessarily that they weren't capable of winning, or we weren't capable of winning big games or choked on that occasion. It's down to that day and what occurs on that day and that year, in lead up to it. So you hope to learn from it, and you hope to gain from the experience of it. But, in terms of, I think you give it your best shot, and sometimes that's good enough and sometimes it's not, and when it's not, you just go away and hope to learn from what you could do better. But even if you were successful, I hope you go away and learn from what you could do better for next time, because, I don't think by winning or losing a big game necessarily determines whether you were a success or not.
No, absolutely. I'm just interested in, do you think it begins to creep in almost the reverse of complacency of, you know what, we lost a couple of these, can we actually do it? Do you think that comes in?
That can happen. That can happen to certain individuals and certain people within your team. And because, I'll go back and each year's a new year. There might be only one or two changes or there might be 10 changes, but it's a new experience. It's a new team. No matter whether you change it by one or you change it by 10, each year is, in my view, taken in isolation. There may be some individuals within that, each of those that is common within those finals that may have been challenged by the fact that they've lost before and a bit of a skeleton in the closet, and that was my job to try and help them overcome that as a coach. But I don't think, I think it's easy from the outside in sport or when you're in the media to say, oh, that group or that club can't overcome that statistic, and it is only a statistic. And as soon as it goes, as soon as they overcome it. You mentioned about the Leeds experience when I first won the grand final with Leeds. Well, they hadn't won it for 32 years, so.
And they've been fantastically successful since then.
Ever since, yeah. But each one's a new, that 32 years, that goes out the window, and now they've become a team that are possible. I don't think there's necessarily a stigma there. I think that those sort of things are just interesting from the outside, and we sort of put a label on clubs or teams or organisations to say, oh, they've never done it before, or they can't again, and it's illogical. In my eyes, it's just a matter of when it happens, and same with Warrington. Warrington may not have under my tenure. I'd like to think we gave it the best shot to win the grand finals on those three occasions. But will it happen? Of course it'll happen. It's a good organisation, and it'll continue to be that way as long as it's run that way, and investments continue to be, part of that organisation, that they will be successful one day. It's just because they haven't been able to do it in the past doesn't mean that's how the future will be. If that sort of...
No, absolutely. And as you say, they won the Challenge Cups, but that's why it's fascinating to talk to someone like yourself, because sports fans, I suppose I'm guilty of it, I asked the question, but
sure,
you're guilty of thinking, is there something fundamentally wrong in the team? And it's fascinating to hear you say, well, firstly, we won the Challenge Cups, which is the other major tournament, but no, there isn't. It's just each game is in isolation.
I think so. And each season is, in what I'm saying. It's you just put that one behind you and say, right, well, there's some lessons to be learned. How can we improve? Right, this is a new campaign. And I think we do put things together. Hey, I'm guilty of it too. I watch other sports, and at times you go, oh, I don't think they can do it because they've never done it before. Or
do they really believe they can do it?
Yeah, that's right. It's, or you watch and you get told and that they haven't won it for 40 years or 30 years or 20 years, so the chances are they can't. Well, when you're involved, you say the chances are that you're going to, and you're going to be part of that soon. And you just don't look at those sort of statistics and go, well, that's why we're going to do something or not. As long as there isn't skeletons in the closet or experiences that have been scarring somebody or some of the organisation, and it's, as a coach or somebody involved in a club, it's up to you to identify if there is something, a stigma that is holding that club back, and overcoming that. So, how
would you go about overcoming that? Because whilst I hear what you're saying, there are you do see sports people and sports teams, and there is a mental block of some description.
Sure.
And I understand you might not have personal experience of it, but how would you go about locating the skeletons in the closet, as you describe it, and getting rid of them?
Yeah, it's by knowing your people and getting to know them even more, and it's developing those relationships to get the understanding, having some honest conversations within the organisation to help identify that. But sometimes and a lot of the time, it isn't necessarily the coach that can repair that. There's other people, and I referred to Damien Hughes. I've worked with Damien, and he's worked within my organisation on a number of occasions over the years, and helped me identify some of those things. Sometimes you don't, as a coach, you don't have the skills to do that, or that you need some outside help to come in and go, well, they're better at, either identifying or fixing some of those, or helping out to fix some of those issues. Some of those can't be identified, but you do your best to see what needs to be helped and fixed, but you don't have all the answers. But it's it's part of the challenge of knowing your organisation as well. And you're right. There are certain organisations that have something within it that holds it back. It's then down to good management to identify what needs to be identified and changed, and whether they've got the capability to do that.
You mentioned it in your answer just now, honesty. Do you think that's the most important trait in developing the right culture?
Yeah, it's very important. Honesty and trust and respect as well. All those values. I think they're very important. Being decent to one another, and sometimes being decent to one another means being honest and talking up, but doing it at the right time and in the right manner and with the right sort of respect is important within a team environment or any organisation. But if there's things that are holding an organisation back, whether it be business or sport, if you don't address it or too scared to raise the topics or the subjects that people know are actually hampering it, well, it's always going to be something that holds the organisation back. So you're better off talking about it, and you're better off identifying it, and you're better off discussing it and trying to fix it rather than avoid it.
You mentioned earlier on about getting outside help. Since you left rugby league, you're now involved. You're now the person going into organisations. How did that come about, and what's that been like?
I love it. I like talking about it now rather than sharing some of my experiences, but some of the things that I've learned along the way. But I'm enjoying learning about other sports and organisations as well. So it's that change aspect. I've become involved in a number of different projects, but a lot of it revolves around welfare and care of management and management level. I'm doing a lot of work with the League Managers Association and trying to make their...
This is in football, soccer.
Soccer, football, yeah. And I'm learning loads about it and loads about a different sport and a different culture within that sport. But it's an organisation that is trying to take care of their members being league managers. And they've got 450 odd members, and they're trying to make it more individualised and more personal. They do some terrific services, or make some terrific services available to their members, but they're trying to make it more personal. And I'm one of the ways that they're doing that, and going out and visiting managers and just talking to people about what they're doing, and making sure that they understand what's available to them in terms of the organisation, but also to see what sort of support they do want and get their opinions on the way that they need to be supported. And I know there's a lot of focus on player welfare and in their well-being, mental well-being, and I'm very interested in the management's well-being, and I think it's different. It's a different pressure. Certainly within that sport, it's very volatile sport for management, that's for sure, and those pressures are always there. But
there's not many people who'd enjoy 9 years in a job like you did at Warrington in football these days.
Not many get the chance to do that. You're right. Not many get the chance to develop a culture. They have to go in and adhere almost to the culture that's within, and which is crazy. To build any organisation, you need stability, and you need to be given a chance to build something and to get buy-in and to convince people around that your ideas are the right ones. To do it in the period of time that some football managers get it's crazy. It's not logical. It's not good business. It's not the right way to go about building anything worthwhile. But that's the challenges that they have, and I'm interested in trying to support some of those challenges and support people that are going through that. That it's their choice to go into it. It's like all of us, and it's volatile. Sport can be volatile. It can be very rewarding in many ways, but it's also very volatile, and it can be disheartening, and it can be heartbreaking. And having experienced a bit of all of those feelings at different stages, and some of the challenges, both professionally and personally, along the way, some of the sacrifices that people in management have to make in order for their jobs to work or to be successful, they're quite big sacrifices that, sometimes money can't necessarily compensate. And there's also that feeling of guilt about, what we sacrifice at different stages. And so to have some insight and some understanding on some of those factors and be able to empathise with some of what the managers are doing. Each case is unique, and each person's story is unique. However, if you've experienced some aspects of it, it gives you some ability to empathise and maybe even come up with just not necessarily a solution, but just a soothing ear. And I think often when we got problems within our lives or challenges within our lives, we're not necessarily sharing that experience with somebody for a solution. Sometimes it's just to get it off our chest and we feel better.
Are you beginning to spot some common threads as you meet different managers, spend time with them all? I mean, in the future, is there scope for you to develop, a program of support? Are you beginning to formulate something in your head that might help universally?
It's very early, this program, very, very early stage. There's a number of us that are involved in it, but it's a little bit of, we're not dipping our toe in at the moment, but we've got to learn along the way and work out. I think it's about developing it in a way that suits the individual. And I think, to say, we're going to make X amount of visits to a particular manager or certain managers need, there's going to be different requirements. There's some managers that are going to like having support there regularly, some that won't require much because they've got their own support network around them. And it's whatever, it's about tailor making it for each of the individuals and making it work for each one that are involved. But just to let them know that there is something there for them, not necessarily for now, but down the track as well. It's that if you ever need somebody as a support, and this isn't all about welfare, this is just, sometimes it's just making them aware that there are some other resources there to tap into that they can use. And it's an awareness thing, but I like the essence of what the organisation is trying to do, to take care of its members, support them in whichever way they can, and help them become better and more successful.
With hindsight, do you think you would have benefited from having someone come in and just sit down, have a cup of tea and ask you how things were going? Did you need that?
I think we all need it as human beings from time to time. And, sometimes we're lucky enough to have that around us, and or you set it up for yourself if you do need it. Sometimes people aren't fortunate enough to have that trusting ear or that person accessible around. So it just depends on the individual. But at different stages, I've certainly needed it, yeah. And, at certain stages, I've been able to set up my own network where I could sit down and have that coffee or just that unwind with somebody or just get something off my chest and nothing come back. That's important. And, it's important for players, and we've got responsibilities to them and to help them develop into good people and develop into people that have got something at the end of their sport as well. Not just the fact that they've been paid a lot of money and they should be set up and able to carry on as good individuals for the rest of their lives.
It's a lazy dismissal of a real problem.
Absolutely.
To just say, well, they've got plenty of money.
Yeah, absolutely. It's irresponsible of us as a society to throw a whole lot of money at a whole lot of young people and say, now, set yourself up for the rest of your life, because that'd be the sensible thing to do, or what I would do if I was in your position. And, often they're not being put in or haven't been given the skills to be able to make the right sort of decisions, what to do with that money, or the lifestyle that they should live during that period of time. That's challenging enough for us older people that have been around here, for a lot longer than some young people. So just by throwing money at people and saying, oh, well, you should be trusted and you should have enough common sense to take care of yourself and be decent human beings, it's a bit naive. It's also, from my perspective, a bit, irresponsible, but it's also not great business as well. I think, the better you arm people with education and coping mechanisms, the better they perform and the better people they become, but they perform better for you. I think there's a responsibility, but not only a responsibility, I think it's a good business choice to get people with less problems so they can perform better for you. So there's a moral aspect of it, but there's also a performance aspect of it as well. But that goes for players, and there's a lot of focus on that, but it also goes for managers too. But I think they've got different challenges, and they're the ones that I'm really interested in nowadays.
And speaking of the challenges of coaching, tell me if I'm miles off here, but seeing interviews with you on TV and other places, it seems like you might have slightly fallen out of love with your own game. Do you think, is that the case, first of all?
Yes and no. Risk of sounding old again, or, there's certain aspects of my sport that, I don't like so much as I have done at certain parts of my career and in my life of watching it.
Is this a playing style, the way it's run?
Yeah, no, bit of both. There's some changes going on in the administration of my sport now, which I think is healthy, and it's needed a change, and some of those fresh voices that I mentioned earlier and ideas. So they've got a real opportunity to hopefully create something bigger and greater and more spectacular than what they have for a while. But it's also some aspects of the way the sport's played. But some of that's down to natural progression of sport. And, the more money involved, the more we become almost conservative to the point of we don't want to lose, so we play a certain style in order so not to lose rather than go out and try and win. And, we influence each other, us professional coaches, and, we find... We're trained to find the things in our sport that help us not to lose. We look at certain trends and aspects, and we break down our sports so much that we find a way that, right, if you remove so many errors within the game and you dominate in this part of the field, well, your chances are enhanced by, tenfold. Well, you're almost crazy not to do it that way in order for survival, but it mightn't necessarily make your sport more attractive. So it's a real difficult one, and it's a real difficult challenge for all of us. And I struggled with some aspects of that towards the latter part of my career. So, I'm a big believer in life that, you either whinge about it. There's no point whinging about it. You either do something about it or you get out of it. And I've chosen to get out of it for a while because I don't want to whinge about it. It is part of the reason and rationale why I got out. But, I'm hopeful that my sport improves and they make some changes within my sport that make it more attractive and less conservative in the future. And that's up to the lawmakers.
We can't blame the coaches because we've talked about how you're shaking your head, perhaps we can blame the coaches, but they've got a responsibility. We've talked about the pressures of winning and potentially losing your job and all the things that come along with that. Do you feel now that now you're outside of it, you are able to influence it more now that you don't have shareholders and fans and players on your back when results aren't going your way, suddenly you can
kind of
try and make the game the way you want it to be?
Kind of. There is that influence. When you're attached to something or someone, it certainly changes the way you view things. It influences you, whether it be subtly or not. So
well, there is a bottom line, isn't there? When you're part of an organisation.
And the reason I'm saying shaking my head, because I take responsibility as a professional coach, or when I was, that I had an influence on my sport, and it wasn't always for the best. Sometimes it was for the reasons of winning a game, which everybody says, a lot of people would say, well, that's what you're employed for. Well, not only that, there's an entertainment factor that needs to be taken into account. But when it comes to your own survival, or you start to bring those things into question and question in your own head. How much do you go along with just, for not just personal survival, but the aspects of what's best for your club rather than what's best for my sport? And I think they're really big challenges for a lot of us within not only rugby league, but in a lot of sports. And what is best? That's why I'm a big one for, I think it's a lot to do with the lawmakers. It's coaches are almost there to find the loopholes, and then it's up to the administrators, particularly in sports where you can change, and change direction for the better, whether that be through equipment used in your sport, or whether it be through some of the rules that your sports, by the way it's adjudicated. We've got to be careful that we don't become, it's only about winning, and there isn't somebody out there to be entertained. Sport, generally speaking, is about entertainment as well, and people coming along and getting enjoyment out of it, and what do they want, and is it only winning? I hear and see a lot of teams booing their own, or criticising tactics of their club, even though they win or have a draw, or they're not losing, but there's a certain styles. So when us coaches and players find those loopholes, it's really important that the sport and the administrators of the sport protect the entertainment value of their sport.
Okay, well, it sounds like you've got a lot of ideas and so many things you want to achieve. I won't ask you what you think you'll do next, but if we were sitting here 10 years from now, look at this beautiful view across the Yorkshire Dales, what would you like to have achieved in those 10 years?
I'd just like to be happy and help people, and continue to make a difference in different people's lives. That's really what I've been trying to do throughout my coaching career. I'm not, you mentioned a couple of those, either successes or not so successful big matches in my career. I don't look at things that way so much, and I'm lucky enough to be involved in sport and to have achieved a few good days out where things have come home, or things have fallen into a place. But
I think that's a very modest description of your career. Well,
but it isn't really what makes me tick. It's some of the other influences that we've been able to have, in people's lives, and some of the development of young people, and some of the relationships that you make along the way, and some of the the way that people have improved and developed. Some of them players, and some of them, just people involved in your environment, in your club. And there's a lot of people that I've been privileged to work with, and a lot of people who have helped me develop. Developing special relationships with them, and being appreciative of what they've done along the way to make me better. That's why I do sport, and that's why I've been a coach, and I just hope I can continue to do that but I'm doing it in a different way. You know, I mightn't have a badge on anymore necessarily, you know, and for a huge part of my life, I've worn a badge. I've been attached to a particular club or a particular organisation. And whilst I've got some connections with some organisations, now that I go in and help and represent, I'm a bit of my own man. I've got no badge, and it's nice. It's a nice change when you've lived so much of it for a particular, you know, organisation.
Well, in the cold, hard world of sport, where it's about results and the bottom line, it's great to hear someone that just wants to make sport and people better. So, Tony, thank you very much for your time. It's been a fascinating insight. A lot of avenues I would have liked to have gone down, but so much to follow up on. Thank you so much for your time. It's been fascinating.
My pleasure, Charlie, and hopefully we can delve into some of those in the future. And you know, I really enjoyed the experience of talking about some of my experiences. But yeah, thanks so much for coming.
As Tony hinted at the end of the conversation, and as he and I discussed after we turned the microphones off, there were so many avenues I felt we could have gone down in this conversation, and listening to it again, there's so many more questions that have sprung up. I've made a list of them, and I hope that in the not too distant future I might be able to meet up with him again and ask all those questions. But in the meantime, big thank you to Tony for taking some time out of his busy schedule to chat to me. We'll be back next Sunday with another episode of The Winning Mentality. In the meantime, do us a favour, check us out on Twitter at TWMPod, Instagram at The Winning Mentality Podcast, and leave us a review on iTunes. Thanks very much for listening, and we'll speak to you next Sunday.